Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sackur. On May the 25th, Irish voters face a choice. By way of a referendum, they can either keep a constitutional amendment which outlaws abortion in all but the most exceptional circumstances, or they can change their constitution and pave the way for the legalisation of abortion. Given Ireland's history, culture and religion, it is a fierce debate. I'm joined by two campaigners, Sinead Redmond, an advocate of expanding abortion rights, and Caroline Simons, an opponent. What does the argument and the likely outcome say about Ireland today? Sinead Redmond and Caroline Simons, welcome both of you to Hard Talk.
Thank you, Stephen.
Sinead, let me start with you. Ireland is an outlier on this question of abortion. If one looks across the European Union, Ireland's laws much more restrictive than the average across Europe. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's a cultural and historical context in which we have traditionally been a Catholic country. We are an outlier in terms of our abortion access, but we are quite similar to Malta, which also has the same cultural and historical context. There's also the fact that we are a post-colonial nation, and so traditionally post-colonial nations find their own identity in difference from the colonizer, and our difference was that we were a Catholic country. And so there was a long history of self-identification with the Catholic nation as part of what it meant to be Irish. That identification and that level of, I think, probably control by the Catholic Church has been kind of slipping away more gradually over the last 20 to 30 years, I think. We've seen it in the referendums of the 1990s, for example, the 1995 divorce referendum, which allowed Irish citizens to divorce for the first time. We saw it also in 1992, which was the X case referendum around a 14-year-old girl who had been raped and made pregnant, and whose parents wanted to take her to the UK for access to an abortion. The Attorney General at the time, because of the existing constitutional amendment passed in 1983, considered that this would be illegal and attempted to prevent her from travelling. There was a Supreme Court hearing on it, which found that because there was a risk to her life of suicide, she was suicidal because of being made pregnant through rape. The Supreme Court found that she did have a right to an abortion, and that was subsequently upheld by the Irish people.
Right, I'm going to stop you there because there's a lot of detail there about legal cases, but I think your line of argument is quite clear, and Caroline, I'm going to turn to you to explore it. I mean, Sinead's saying, in essence, we have to understand that Ireland has been heavily influenced by the Catholic Church, by a religious dogma and a history, which gradually, she says, over time, over the last 30 years, is changing. Ireland is fundamentally changing, and therefore all of these social conventions and laws governing things like abortion must change too. Would you accept that?
I wouldn't accept the last point you've made, that they must change too, but certainly much of what Sinead has said I would agree with. And our constitution, as it was drafted in 1937, does refer to, Judeo-Christian heritage, and the laws are found under a God by the people. That certainly was the understanding. There's no doubt about it. There has been a slippage in religious observance right across all faiths, all Christian faiths in Ireland over the last number of decades.
And would you accept, therefore, that this debate about abortion, which of course comes to a head on May 25th with the referendum, can be seen in the context of votes over the last 20 years on divorce, on gay marriage, on different social conventions where Ireland is getting closer to the European, if one can put it this way, liberal, progressive mainstream?
You might characterise it as progressive, and I'm afraid again I'll have to disagree with your adjective. No, I don't think so. I think in more recent decades, and particularly in the last decade, it's seen as a human rights issue. And whether you agree, you know, there's a suggestion that there's an international law human right to abortion, which of course we all know there isn't. People are looking at it more, not from a religious perspective, I would suggest. I mean, we've seen Muslims and the Presbyterian Church come out against this referendum, so it's not simply the Catholic Church, but it really goes beyond religion, Stephen. I think at this point people look upon it as a medical issue, as a human rights law issue, and I think we haven't seen very much involvement, in fact, from the Church in the campaign.
Well, let's explore the human rights issue as it stands. I mean, we know that women in Ireland who get pregnant and don't want to be pregnant, and some have real serious medical concerns, either with the unborn child or with themselves, others, as a choice, do not at that moment want to be pregnant. We know that women in Ireland can get abortions, and it's not illegal, but they have to go outside the country. Most of them go to the UK, some go to other parts of Europe. Now, isn't there just a fundamental hypocrisy about that, and also a denial of the rights of Irish women to actually have something that is illegal abroad, have it accessible at home? Isn't that a basic right?
I don't think that you can describe it that way. I mean, we have a different culture in Ireland. When we talk about terminating pregnancy, which is legal in Ireland now, we mean terminating the pregnancy. We don't mean terminating the fetus. And that's the difference between abortion and what our law currently allows.
Yeah, to be clear, because
to be
some people will not know that right now the only circumstances in which a termination, as you put it, is legal is where the life of the mother is in immediate danger.
No, it doesn't have to be in immediate danger. That's another misapprehension. We allow termination of pregnancy where there's a real and substantial risk to a mother, to her life, including by her own threat of suicide. And that risk does not have to be imminent or immediate. It just has to be probable. So there's room there for manoeuvre and for clinical decision.
Well, is that right, Sinead? Because if that is right, then...
I think that the clinicians across the country strongly disagree with that description. We're seeing leading obstetricians have come out in favour of voting yes in the campaign to allow women access to abortions where we need it. The Institute of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, one of two regulatory bodies for obstetricians in the country, have approximately 80% of their members in favour. Number of leading obstetricians, including Peter Boylan, Rona Mahoney, Louise Kenny, Cliona Kelly, numbers of others, Mary Higgins, Maeve Egan, across the country are coming out and strongly saying we need the 8th to be repealed in order to protect women's and girls' health in pregnancies.
Can I come back in there?
Well, you may, but I actually just want to expand the thought a little further. As I was saying, we know women do go abroad to get terminations, abortions, and I believe the figures are roughly, it averages out about 10 a day are doing it in Ireland, so roughly 3,500 to 4,000 women a year, women and girls, because some are under the age of consent, are getting those abortions overseas. Now, we have case studies. For example, I'll just give you one. Jennifer Ryan, now, this a few years ago, but she describes a nightmare situation where she had a scan at 22 weeks. Her baby, the doctors told her, had no chance at all of survival, had a really severe form of spina bifida. She took the choice in the end that she had to terminate, and she went to Liverpool, and she had to bring, because she wanted to bury the unborn child which had been terminated, she had to bring that child back in a coffin in the boot of her car from Liverpool in England. What kind of country puts a woman in that situation?
Can I just come back first of all, because I think it's very important that people are very clear about this. Under the rules which govern the practice of medicine in Ireland, it's very, very clear under Article 48(3) of the Code of Practice for doctors that they don't have to wait until a woman is dying, that they may intervene, they may end a pregnancy where there's a risk to the mother's life, and it makes very, very clear it does not have to be immediate, and that's the end of it. That is the law, and that is what doctors are supposed to understand. So to say that some obstetricians have come out and that 80% of obstetricians disagree, that is entirely incorrect.
Well, that's clearly a matter of difference between the two of you, but
no,
I do want to move...
No, it's not a matter of fact, Stephen.
Well,
the 5 previous heads of the Institute of Obstetricians and Gynecologists have come out very, very strongly against the current head, and 8 18 obstetricians signed a letter 2 days ago to ask him to step aside while the referendum was going on and to stop campaigning. He has no mandate to do that.
You, Caroline, were the one who said this is a matter of human rights, and I'm focused now on the human right of this particular woman. It's just a case study, one of many.
Yeah.
She's called Jennifer Ryan, who, as I say, discovered that her unborn child had an incurable form of severe spina bifida, had no chance of survival. She had to go to Liverpool to have the termination. She then had to bring the body back for burial in the boot of her car. And I'm asking you whether you think you want to live in an Ireland which forces women into that situation.
Would it be any different if she had to bring the baby in the boot of the car back to Durham, Stephen? Because it's the same
Should
conditions
she not
apply.
have the right to do that amongst her family, her loved ones, in her own home and community?
You see, we have a different ethos so far in the practice of medicine in Ireland. We don't hasten or deliberately cause the death of any patient, whether it's an elderly and infirm patient or whether it's a baby in the womb. So that isn't an option in Ireland. I know that people come to England to have terminations done and then to deliver a dead fetus and to bury it. And I know that they fill out forms to say how they want the baby's remains to be disposed of. That's the same whether you're an English or an Irish person.
The Human Rights Council of the United Nations has looked at this matter a couple of times, and they have concluded that Ireland has failed to strike the right balance between the protection of the fetus and the rights of the women. They say the Irish situation imposes, quote, a high level of mental anguish which amounts to cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment on Irish women in these sorts of situations.
Well, let's look at that. There are 6 committees actually at the UN who have been highly critical of our abortion laws and who have issued edicts dictating that we should change them and change them according to their diktat. The fact is that none of these committees have power to either expand or interpret the conventions and the treaties which they monitor. They can simply monitor and report. Their statements and their conclusions are not binding on us. And it was very, very clear when you look at the decisions.
Might give you pause for thought, though.
They might indeed. And when you look at the European Court of Human Rights decisions, you'll see that they have seen that countries have what they call a margin of appreciation to make their own laws in relation to abortion and other socially controversial issues. And in that case, they accept the balance that we have struck, but they have suggested also that where we have allowed abortion in our law, that we must make it clear and the women must know when they can access it. So that's the legal position.
All right. Well, I've focused quite a few questions on you, Caroline. So, Sinead, I guess for you to flip around the human rights argument, there is an argument now put by campaigners like Caroline that we know so much more today than we've ever known before about how the fetus develops in the womb. And to quote a doctor, Siobhan Crowley, who is on the pro-life side of this argument, she says, look, we now know a baby's heartbeat starts at 22 days. A 12-week-old unborn baby has a beating heart, can swallow, yawn, kick, stretch and jump, has all his or her legs, fingers, toes, fingernails and hair, vital organs, responds to touch, a fully formed face. This is a person, and the latest scanning and ultrasound techniques tell us exactly what this fetus can do, even by 12 weeks, which, if the law changes in Ireland, will be the threshold before which any woman can get an abortion on demand.
So I think it's important to point out that Dr. Crowley has been strongly contradicted on that argument by many leading obstetricians, and also a Primetime Investigate special in Ireland that ran this week found those claims to be inaccurate. But more than that, I think it's important to highlight that not only is it not necessarily about how we feel about development of an individual pregnancy, but how each woman, each girl, each person that becomes pregnant, each family that deals with the pregnancy feels about each individual pregnancy. Your feelings about a particular pregnancy may change depending on what pregnancy it is, depending on your circumstances, depending on your family situation. And you talked already about how women are travelling for the abortions that they're not allowed to access in Ireland. What it's also important to notice is that not only are 10 women a day travelling, but 3 to 5 women every single day in Ireland are self-administering illegally at home with the abortion pill without medical care. And I know this because I've been involved in providing that abortion pill to dozens of women.
Have you?
Dozens of women.
You have fundamentally broken the law.
I have broken the law, and I will continue to break the law because it's unjust.
So if you tell me that on television, worldwide television, as you just have...
I've testified to it numerous times.
The Irish authorities should really Under the letter of the law, be locking
Under the
you
letter
up.
of the law, they should be locking me up, and they should be locking up the other 3 to 5 women and their partners and everyone else who supports them every single day.
So Caroline, not only does she think the law is fundamentally wrong, but she also says it's a mockery because the Irish authorities are not following through on it.
Well, it's been described by Anne Faridi, the head of BPAS here, the biggest independent abortion provider in Britain, as a staggering problem in the UK too.
You're both mothers, you're both highly respected members of your communities. Can you look her in the eye and say to her, because of what she's just told us about the fact she's helped women administer to themselves the pill, which essentially is an abortion pill,
Yeah.
do you regard her as a child killer?
I regard her as putting women very much at risk, and we have found the Irish Family Planning Association has been giving similar bad advice to women, saying that when they come back from the UK that they're to tell doctors that they're miscarrying rather than that they've had abortions. No, I think the abortion pill is a problem in jurisdictions across Europe, Stephen, where abortion is actually legal, and we're not. I think it's terribly important that we let the listeners know what we're actually voting on Friday, on the 25th of May, because we're not voting on decriminalising abortion. That would be something
We're
that would
voting
be
on decriminalising it for women, which is not the current situation.
No, I'd like to describe what we are voting on Friday, if you like. What we're not voting on any legislation or decriminalising on Friday. What we're voting on is a very simple question. It's, will the people agree to take out of the Constitution the pro-life article that went in 1983, which acknowledges and recognises the equal right to life of the mother,
gives equal
and
right
undertakes
to the unborn child as the mother.
But wait, it undertakes to defend and vindicate that right only as far as is practicable. So there's a built-in understanding that the mother's rights and life will come first, and that sometimes in looking after her, the baby will die.
If you win on May 25th, the argument from the pro-life people is that there will be a massive surge in the numbers of abortions. That some Irish women who would not have had abortions because they wouldn't have made the decision to go overseas and go through all of the stress and anguish and hassle that entails, that they will have abortions because they're much easier to get at home, and therefore the overall number of abortions in Ireland will go up. Do you accept that?
I don't. That's not consistent with what we see internationally. So if you look at Portugal in 2007, they had a referendum on similar abortion access law to the one being proposed in Ireland. And what they've actually seen in the subsequent 10 years since they have allowed women access to abortion on request with their medical provider, as is being proposed in the legislation, should the 8th be repealed on the 25th of May.
The 8th is the amendment that we've just been talking about.
Discussing. So what they've seen is that there's been a decrease from the 2007 rate of abortions to 2017, with the making it safe and legal for women to access abortions, and that women are safer in maternity care, they're safer in accessing abortion. We are not arguing that there should be no abortion or some abortion. We are saying there is some abortion anyway, regardless of how this vote goes on the 25th of May, and that abortion should be safe for women, and it's not at the moment.
One thing we haven't really mentioned as part of this discussion so far is the role of the Catholic Church. It strikes me as very interesting, Caroline. I mean, we talked about the history, but I mean the role of the Catholic Church in the campaign running up to May 25th. Seems to me the Church has taken very much a back seat and a background role, and I just wonder whether that's because, frankly, the Catholic Church in Ireland today is deeply tainted, and its voice and its credibility have been undermined by a series of scandals, many of them concerning sexuality, paedophile priests, the treatment of young girls who became pregnant and were shunted off into institutions which treated them abysmally and often left their babies in unmarked graves. Has all of that undermined the Church's ability to be a part of this campaign?
I think the problems that you're describing aren't solely confined to Ireland. I think you've had the same thing with clergy in England and in America and in Australia and other places. I can't answer for the Catholic Church, but I certainly know that in the churches around Ireland that priests are speaking about the referendum, and they're explaining to people what the consequences of removal of the 8th Amendment would be, I haven't claimed that there'd be a huge surge. I haven't
so
actually
you're
addressed
happy
that
to be
point yet.
associated with the to see your part of the campaign very much in lockstep with the Catholic Church and its
You're saying
voice.
that, Stephen.
No,
I
I'm
haven't said
asking
that
you
at
whether
all.
you want to be associated with the Catholic Church on this.
I don't know what kind of level of appreciation for the kind of campaign that's going on in Ireland there is here in Britain and with the listeners internationally. But this really is a campaign that is being led on both sides by lay people, and the church has its all churches have something to say about it to their congregations, but you certainly won't find in debates like this in Ireland, in current affairs programmes and in the media, you don't really find a clergy of any hue getting particularly involved. They look after their own flocks in their own congregations. So I think, you know, this has become more a legal and a medical and then a personal campaign. It's those kind of issues that are exercising people. And I think it would be nice if we had an opportunity to explain to the listeners also why I would regard, and many people would regard, what is being proposed in Ireland as more liberal than what's available currently in England, and why people are so concerned with the proposals that the government have.
Well, very briefly on that, Sinead, I mean, I think the contention of Caroline and her campaign is that if the Irish government proceeds with legislation, if the referendum goes in favour of repealing the Eighth Amendment and therefore opening up legislation to legalise abortion, the argument from Caroline's camp is that the plan appears to be to allow abortions on demand without any reference to a doctor up to 12 weeks, which is actually more liberal than the UK.
That's not the case. There will be a GP and a doctor involved. So the plan is to take us into step with the majority of the rest of the EU, unlike the UK, where you have an abortions on request up to 12 weeks with your primary healthcare provider or an alternative doctor if needs be.
Okay.
Thereafter, it will be considerably more restrictive than the UK because there will be no grounds for access on disability grounds, for example. There will be no grounds for access on risk to health, which is the current grounds in the UK for
so your contention is that it will actually be a more conservative system, if I can put it that way, than the UK?
The definition proposed in the legislation is that of a risk to serious harm to health, which, as Caroline knows, is a defined legal term in use already in Ireland. It is a very high threshold of evidentiary need to pass, and requires 2 doctors, one of whom must be an obstetrician to certify the risk.
Okay, well let's park that for now, because there's something very interesting been written recently by an Irish writer, very respected novelist called Patrick McCabe. He said, look, I think that there may be a way in which this Irish referendum vote on the specific issue of abortion may tap into feelings that we've seen, for example, in the American election of Donald Trump, we've seen in the British embrace of Brexit, in the referendum in the UK. He says it's about the non-metropolitan people of Ireland being really fed up with a metropolitan elite telling them how to think and how to behave. And he says that might feed into actually a surprise victory for the pro-life camp.
So as someone living rurally, can I take that?
Go on.
So this is very different from the campaigns that you mentioned, in that this is a grassroots fed campaign. This is one that's being pushed up by the ground by the need of women and girls and families to have abortion access and abortion care provided in Ireland in our maternity system, because it is dangerous for us not to have that. What I'm seeing on the ground where I live, which is a very rural...
And as you say, you live in the country. You live very far from Dublin.
I do. I live very far. I live half an hour's drive from the nearest big town to me. The nearest village to me has a population of 400 people. What we are seeing is huge swathes of the community around us very, very strongly in support of this campaign. We have people out leafleting and canvassing every night of the week in small towns, small villages.
The other way of interpreting the current polling evidence in the run-up to polling day is that the abortion rights camp appears to have a small lead, and not least it has a significant lead amongst younger Irish people, and I wonder how you think you can close that gap.
I don't think that that's necessarily the case, and I think that people are beginning to understand that this can't be restrictive legislation that will follow removal of the Eighth Amendment. If we remove the Eighth Amendment, then any restrictions in acts of Parliament that are passed afterwards will crumble when there's a constitutional challenge, because the only constitutional rights holder will be the mother after that. And I have to say to you, you know, there's no evidence whatsoever that the maternal care in Ireland is substandard. We have better maternal mortality statistics and better health outcomes than you have here in the UK.
Do you think it's going to be very close, this vote?
I don't know.
I think it probably will be quite close. I think and I hope that we will carry it in the end.
All right. Well, Sinead Redmond and Caroline Simons, I thank you both very much for being on
Stephen.
HARDtalk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sinead.
Thank you both.